morning, partners of Just Recovery for Hamilton Coalition are hosting this workshop ahead of the city's public delegation day next month. It's great to see so many people, so many members of the community wanting to be involved and interested to learn about the delegating at the City Hall, the budget process, and what a just recovery could mean for Hamilton. For the 2021 budget, it's important than ever for the city councilors to hear from us. If you have experienced Delegate, or if this is your first time, we hope this workshop is a start of more people having their voices heard in the municipal level. I'll now take a second to introduce the workshop hosts. My name is Veronica Gonzalez. I'm a member of Hamilton Acorn. I'll pass it to Ian.
Hey everyone, my name is Ian Borsick. I'm the Climate Campaign Coordinator at Environment Hamilton, and I'll pass it over to Carl.
Hello everyone, my name is Carl. I'm the Community Benefits Manager over at the Hamilton Community Benefits Network.
I can go next. Hi everyone, I'm Linda Lukasik. I'm the Executive Director at Environment Hamilton, and I'm going to pass it over to Olivia.
Sure. I'm Olivia with Hamilton Acorn.
Great, thank you.
If we can just pause for one quick sec. We just got a couple more people coming into the
okay.
Just late here. So sorry everyone, we're just going to give it another 2 minutes here. We have a few late entries. We just had 5 people pop in. So
okay, Carl, you want to let me know when is good to continue?
Just give them like 1-2 minutes more.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. Yeah, I don't see a flurry of other people. So, all right. Sorry, Veronica, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to go over the agenda for today and a couple of rules to make sure we have a great meeting. To help the sound quality during the presentation, we will be muting people, but feel free to use the chat if you're joining in through over a video. At the end of the presentation, we will be doing a breakout groups to give a chance for people to discuss their delegation and troubleshoot any concerns. We hope you can stick around for that. For people that are joining over the phone that can't see the agenda on the slide, we will be going over the budget process, just recovery principles, followed by delegation training. So what is the just recovery for Hamilton? Mindful of the challenges facing the city, especially those exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, a coalition of not-for-profits joined together to produce a policy document titled A Just Recovery for Hamilton. It's a municipal policy investment and opportunities for a more equitable COVID-19 recovery for 2021. We released the report on January 15th. We will post a link to the website on the report in the chat. The coalition includes YMCA, Hamilton, Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton, Environmental Hamilton, Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction, the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, SASHA, Hamilton Acorn, Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusionary, Spectrum, and the Hamilton Community Benefits Network. I will now pass it to Ian from Environment Hamilton. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. So yeah, as I said before, my name's Ian with Environment Hamilton. And we figured it's important for this folks, especially for folks who haven't delegated before or haven't been aware of the process, exactly what is the municipal budget process. So we're going to call this part Municipal Budgets 101. So many of you on this call have probably seen this exact image. This is pulled from the City of Hamilton website. This is for the 2020 distribution of tax dollars. In a lot of ways, the way the City of Hamilton portrays our taxes and the way we do our budget is through how much the average homeowner who owns the average priced or assessed house. And that's how they communicate the breakdown in how the spending has been done. But really, this is sort of just not a full picture of how things really function in the city. And ultimately, it's a little bit more deep and complicated than that. So really, at the most high level, we pay taxes. So whether you're a renter or a homeowner, ultimately you're paying taxes. As really rent at the end of the day is what you give your landlord, and then your landlord pays their taxes. And landlords can't pay taxes without renters. And our taxes go to two main types of spending. It's either capital or operating. And in addition to that, beyond operating and capital budgets, there's also budgets that are supported through grants, transfers from other levels of government, and as well as through revenue and rates. But at the most basic level, most services that the City of Hamilton offers is either an operating service or a capital service when we think about budgeting. And a capital service or a capital expenditure is what you think of when it comes to infrastructure or one-time spending. So a capital expense would be the concrete used for implementing a sidewalk or replacing a sidewalk, while the operating side of that would be for the city staff time, the amount of money that was spent to fuel up the car that was driven over that the city worker then used. And so the best way to think about this is an operating budget are ongoing regular costs, and a capital budget is something that is more or less a one-off cost. In addition to that, there's also revenue from rates and fees. But generally speaking, that's how most services and expenditures in the city are viewed. So with regards to what does the city actually do, it does quite a bit. There's a lot of departments within the City of Hamilton, and municipalities within Ontario over the years have been downloaded quite a few responsibilities. And so it's actually quite difficult for cities to plan this all, and so they put it through departments. And in the City of Hamilton, we have many departments within these departments, but there's four key ones. There's the Healthy and Safe Communities Department, which is headed and includes the Public Health Department. There's Corporate Services. Corporate Services may seem a bit more vague, but this is typically where you find finance staff. Finance staff typically are the ones who work on the budget work and the budgeting, as well as things like applications for businesses and things like that. Then there's the Planning and Economic Development Department. So that's more or less the city staff that decide what goes where in a really big nutshell. And then there's Public Works, and Public Works is sort of the rest of the city. So Public Works includes things like our water service, waste collection, our HSR, so our bus service, and other services like that. When we're thinking about our taxes, though, and when we're thinking about how they go towards things, a really good example I like to use is our HSR bus, because it's a really great example of how all the different forms of taxation and the different forms of budgeting come into play. So with regards to the bus that we're looking at right now, we're seeing a capital expenditure in terms of how much that bus costs the city as a one-time payment to purchase. But there's also operating costs with regards to paying for the salary of that HSR bus driver, as well as the maintenance staff that work on the bus and things like that. But in addition to that, as we know, there's actually an area rating for transit. So depending on where that bus is operating, a rate may apply. And then in addition to that, the HSR has also funded their operating budget by 50% by revenue, more or less. So what that means is that 50% of the operating budget for the HSR comes from the fare box. So it's not just taxes going towards the operation of the municipal bus service, it's many different revenues and streams of funding that go into it. And then that's what we're talking about. So when we're talking about capital expenditure, we're talking about purchasing the bus. And when we're talking about operating expenditure, we're talking about the cost of operating that bus. And really at the end of the day as well, it's incredibly important just to keep in mind that the City of Hamilton has a lot of ongoing responsibilities. So there's annual budgeting. So that maybe would include looking at the annual budget of the HSR, but then there's multi-year budgeting as well, because there's a lot of projects and services that simply just is not viable to offer on a year-to-year basis, but has to be planned multiple years in advance. And in some cases, multiple terms in advance. And the city of Hamilton will take on projects that in theory are so important and so massive that many iterations of councils, which is a 4-year term, oversee that project and ultimately oversee the spending of our tax dollars on that project. And so, as I said before, the budget is a pretty big deal. In a lot of ways, the budget work never really stops. As I said, corporate services oversees most of the financial matters within the city, and they're working on the budget more or less year round. They're looking at multi-year budgets year round as well. But with regards for our purposes, when it comes to an annual budget that we're asking you folks to delegate to council about, generally speaking, rate supported budgets are examined and then presented to council in the late fall. This budgetary cycle is a little bit different because of the pandemic, but this is more or less how it's usually done. The reason for that is because rates are fairly fixed. They're set by council, so it's much easier to plan ahead with those. And then tax supported capital budgets are examined shortly afterwards. That's usually in the winter before the new year. And that's also, again, because it's a little bit easier to plan. Capital projects are much easier to wrap your head around. The costs are much more solid. And then January into February sees the departmental budgets and operating budget outlook. Then Public Delegation Day happens. That is the one day that anyone in the city of Hamilton is given to delegate to council and have your input on the entirety of the budget. I'm sure many of us on this call would prefer if residents in the city of Hamilton had the ability to comment on multiple budgets or perhaps be able to speak to very specific departmental budgets. But unfortunately, the city of Hamilton hasn't taken that route. We're given one day to comment on everything. And then in theory, budget deliberations happen after that point. So this year it's February 8th, as I said, and then deliberations happen potentially well into March. It is worth saying that there is a pretty good chance that most city councilors have a very good idea of what they want the budget to look like well before any of this process happens. Some of you maybe have read in the news or seen on social media or things like that, where city councilors sort of have a idea of how much they want taxes to go up by a certain percent, and then they try to make everything fit that number after the fact. And then, of course, there's also ongoing projects, as I said, that are multi-year projects that most city councils wouldn't dare to throw through a loop or anything like that. And then final approval is typically set by the province, and they have to meet that deadline. Municipalities are creatures of the province within Ontario, and legally speaking, a city cannot pass an unbalanced budget. So the city cannot spend more than what we have coming in. And that is just a legal requirement. Like a municipality in Ontario legally cannot do that. It's just impossible, technically speaking. And then it's approved. And then in theory, we have a few months where city council is no longer talking about the budget. And then the deliberations start to happen again as city council proposes things, approves motions, asks staff to do things, and then the process starts all over again the next year. And then with that, I'll hand it over to Carl to talk about the Just Recovery Hamilton principles.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about this. So I wanted to talk about the Just Recovery principles. When the group of not-for-profits got together to talk about how COVID recovery could happen in this city, we thought it was important to investigate the myriad of ways that the pandemic has laid bare a lot of the inequities in this city that have been known for a lot of people experiencing them, but may not have been known for everyone across the city. And the pandemic, more now than ever, has really shown us in a lot of ways how precarious the nature of work is for a lot of folks. So what we did is we focused on some core principles to help dictate how we would structure our 150 requests of the city to make the city a more just city coming out of COVID and a better city coming out of COVID than the one that we went into. So we divided those principles into the top level categories of investing in women. Talking about that was kind of at the top of the mind. Women have been the majority of the frontline workers affected by the pandemic. They make up the vast majority of nursing staff, the vast majority of people working in long-term care. They have borne the most brunt of the unemployment, as well as those who are marginalized in the working poor. So it was really important to center women at the beginning of this and talk about making the city specifically and making recommendations of things that the city within its areas of jurisdiction could do to help invest in women. So we talked about the labor force effects of women, the need for more childcare, addressing domestic violence, and access to menstrual products as kind of key themes under the investing in women topic. We talked about mobility justice as another core theme of a just recovery. Now, mobility justice talks about making sure the ways that we get around the city are equitable. There are a lot of us who use public transit who depend on clear sidewalks, who need accessible doors. So as a topic of conversation, we really wanted to press upon the municipality how important it was that they make continued investments in making sure that all of us, whether we're in a walker, a wheelchair, whether we take the bus, we use the sidewalks, had access to move around our city and to connect in our city in a way that wasn't necessarily car dependent and that didn't require you to own a car, and acknowledge the fact that not everyone has the same mobility needs as others. So it was very important for us to talk specifically about mobility justice in this. Another key conversation point that we wanted to talk about was disability justice. Now, before I get too far into this, all of these themes are interwoven and interconnected. It's important to point that out. They don't exist in a bubble. What touches on investing in women also touches on mobility justice, also touches on housing as a human right. So although these are our themes of conversation, they all link deeply with each other and they are all interconnected. So when we talk about disability justice, we wanted to narrow those things into things that the city could specifically do in terms of their emergency response for people with disabilities, touching on the fact that there is limited shelter space in our shelter system for folks with disabilities. A lot of shelters are not accessible and have challenges. We wanted to talk about the drastic lack of temporary and permanent housing for people with disabilities. We wanted to talk about some of the concerns that the city could voice around some of the changes to the triage protocol that the provincial government is now considering in terms of actually using orders in council, that is to say the provincial powers that they have under the Emergency Services Act, to overturn the right to need consent when performing a medical procedure, like performing life-saving procedures. We wanted to talk about specifically addressing violence against people with disabilities, and then general access, that is to say, not necessarily how you get around the city, but how you access city services. Is there closed captioning available? Are the city's websites accessible? Are city services accessible? Are city buildings accessible? So we kind of tied those into the disability justice, which brings us into our next theme, which again, you can see has overlapping with, especially with conversations around disability justice with housing, which is housing as a human right. We really wanted to emphasize to the city some of the things that I'm sure I don't have to tell some of the folks on this call are very important. The tenant vulnerability, the displacement and gentrification that's been ongoing in this city, and asking the city to use its municipal tools and its municipal powers to help fight rent evictions and some of the displacement that's going on by the booming development industry. We wanted to talk about protecting vulnerable Hamiltonians from extreme heat. Anybody who lives in a multi-dwelling apartment, especially a high-rise, knows that air conditioning is often a challenge. It's really difficult. And although we have a bylaw that prevents a landlord from freezing you to death, we do not have a bylaw in this city that requires a landlord to keep your unit at a livable temperature. It could be 30, 40 degrees in your unit, and there is no municipal bylaw in place to enforce that. We wanted to talk about the drastic and terrible death situation that's going on in long-term care homes and what the city could do using its regulatory power, including the 2 city-owned long-term care homes that they manage themselves. We also wanted to talk about residential care facilities, which is an area of access that the city has a great deal more municipal power in enforcing. So those are retirement homes, retirement communities, things that might not necessarily be long-term care homes, group homes. There's a whole bunch of residential care facilities, and they fall more into the area that the city could be doing to regulate and bylaw. Obviously, intersecting through all of these was tackling the underlying systemic racism. Anybody who participated in Pride or who follows the news and is aware of the hate groups that have been congregating in front of City Hall, the attacks that went on at the 2 years of Hamilton Pride festivals, the ongoing issues of graffiti across the city and hate crimes, knows that we need to tackle this. And it was very important for us as a collective to make sure that we mentioned that front and center, and we made sure that we had some recommendations for the city. And then, of course, that brings us to investing in decent jobs, decent wages in our local economy. And we wanted to talk about ways the city, as we were just discussing the budget right now, the city spends almost $1 billion a year to run the city. It also spends an additional, it has an additional $16 billion in capital assets. That's our roads, our pipes, our waters, the buildings that the city owns, the parks. And all of those assets need what's upkeep and maintenance, and the city also pays for that and also makes, as Ian was saying, long-term capital investments to buy that. So we wanted to ask the city, hey, you're spending all this money anyway. What tools could you use to make the lives of Hamiltonians better while you're spending our tax dollars on our municipal services and on our municipal assets? So we wanted to ask them about looking at a social procurement policy. Very quickly, a social procurement policy means that when the city puts something out to tender, whether it's for a garbage truck operator or a security guard or whatever the contract is that they put out, that they make sure that they emphasize trying to hire locally, try to hire from women and racially owned businesses, that they try and make sure that they put language in what's called the request for qualifications and the request the RFP process. So those are two technical terms I won't dwell on because I've only got about 15 minutes to do this, but those are just terms the city uses when they're buying things. So to make sure they put language in those contracts that supports paid sick days, a living wage policy, that they make sure that there's adequate access to child care for the subcontractors that they use. We wanted to talk about including community benefits agreements, which can help in workforce development and job creation, as well as raising the voices of local communities to the table in large-scale developments in the cities. We wanted to talk about deep energy retrofits and green jobs. Of course, as I mentioned, the city could take a leadership role on paid sick days and a living wage policy. We can look at much more investment in the arts. The arts industry was incredibly hard hit, as if any of you are artists, you may know from the recent pandemic. We also wanted to focus on inclusive food city building. And one of the subcategories of that was addressing food insecurity. Now, this is a global problem, and the city of Hamilton is obviously not going to be able to wave its hand and fix food insecurity, but there are things that they can do. They can defer more of their funds to our food bank system. They can free up payment for the community gardens for insurance and land plots. They can expand the community garden system and provide more city park space and more city green space for growing foods in community gardens. We wanted to talk about high-speed access for all. We had the Gage Park pilot project, which provides internet for a vast number of people. That we also wanted to touch and have that program expanded. We wanted to touch on what the city could do, like other cities was doing, to provide low-cost internet for folks in need, like the city of Toronto has done in partnering with internet providers. We wanted to talk about the lack of high-speed internet outside of the urban area. So there are rural areas where you're still stuck with dial-up or very poor quality high-speed internet and couldn't participate in meetings. And the pandemic has shown that everyone needs access to the internet in order to connect. This very meeting is dependent on the internet, and some people aren't getting the full experience because they've had to call in. We wanted to talk about keeping and expanding our outdoor spaces. So our parks and our trails and our paths, they've been key for spaces for people to get out, to exercise, to get a breath of fresh air, to escape from their walls during COVID. And if those places aren't accessible, that means that they haven't got the correct rampage, snow shoveling, that they are not, that there's not proper transit to them. A lot of our most beautiful spaces in this city, you really need a car to get to. And that's just a fact. There's also fees for services for some of those outdoor spaces. And we wanted to talk about that. We wanted to talk about on inclusive city building, making sure that we were doing green development and had building standards that supported an environmental social value. If you hadn't noticed, environmental issues also predominate through this. They're a massive challenge that once we're through with the COVID-19, we really have to focus on the climate change and the pending climate crisis. We also, another key aspect in an accessible Hamilton was publicly accessible gender neutral washrooms. If you've ever had to go to the bathroom, you know that for the most part you have to pay to pee, and that there's no 24-hour accessible free public washrooms. The public washrooms that there are limited. They're not very well advertised. So this was another area that we wanted to really touch on, and investing in green infrastructure policy and public access. So in this category, we wanted to center environmental needs as part of a climate and COVID recovery, we really, as we're recovering from COVID, as we're making investments in this city, that we really need to be growing a climate resilient, inclusive city. And we wanted to touch on, of course, the fact that currently right now, fair fees for stormwaters are not paid evenly. There are massive parking lots in malls in this city that that do not pay for the massive amounts of stormwater that they generate. They only pay for the amount of water they use. So your building may actually pay more in stormwater fees than a whole parking lot, which generates a massive amount of stormwater. And lastly, but most importantly, or not least, I guess they're all very important, was supporting the 2S LGBTQI plus communities. As I mentioned, hate is an ongoing issue, and these groups face special challenges around dealing with hate, around a lack of accessible community spaces to access, around jobs as the COVID recovery begins. So we also wanted to make sure that we emphasize that as well. So these were the general themes that we tied 150 recommendations that we're hoping that you'll use as points of conversation and consideration when you think about how the budget's affected you and what you would like from a COVID recovery. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Carl. Yes, everyone, and if you need more details too and you're welcome. Take a look at the Just Recovery website. Take a look at the reports. Any topics that you're interested to read further, take a look at the report. There's a lot of details there. So what is delegation? Okay, a delegation is your opportunity to let our elected officials know your opinion on issues they are discussing. In this case, we're getting ready to delegate on Public Delegations Day for 2021 budget. Before COVID, delegating at the City Hall meant speaking in front of the public and council in the council chamber. Now, delegation is done virtually, either through live video or a pre-recorded video. Members, sorry about that. I'm sorry about that. I lost my point. Yes, members of the public are given 5 minutes to delegate. Why is it important to delegate? City councilors are unlimitedly responsible to those who elect them. They are there to represent you. Hearing from members of the public gives them another way in which to view a particular issue, spending, priority, and budget. Delegating to the councilors and the mayor lets them have an opportunity to explain your experience and how the decisions they are making could directly affect you or people that represents them. Without hearing from you, councilors can only depend on staff reports and their own experiences. This can often be very different from the issues we are facing in our communities. COVID has further amplified the social and financial injustices in our city. February 8th is a chance for us to be heard. We don't want to go back to the status quo as the city recovers from the pandemic. We want council to put community priorities and concerns first. Pass it to Ian.
Great, thanks, Veronica. So yeah, when you're doing a delegation, a lot of people ask, what should I talk about? It's just important to remember you have 5 minutes. And they will keep you to it. It's pretty rare on delegation day for council to extend your time, though not unheard of. Just don't bank on it. Focus on some core points. So within those 5 minutes, really think, are there just 3 things I want to make clear, and then work from there. And really, it can be easiest and most effective, as Veronica said before, to tell your own story. So don't necessarily worry about presenting facts and figures. Don't worry about pulling actual data from the budget platform or from the budget documents and citing them and talking about them. Really, your job is to tell council what you find value in and what you want them to do. It's their job to listen to you, as Veronica was saying. So again, even if you're just going up, don't be afraid to repeat what other delegates have said, or even just to outright endorse ongoing demands that already exist within our community. And then we're also going to talk a little bit more what to expect from Linda, but I'm going to first pass it over to Carl to talk about the actual process of registering to delegate.
Thank you, Ian. So how to sign up to give a delegation to City Council. There's two ways. You have the option to send an email to clerk@hamilton.ca, or you can go to the city's website, and we'll post both those links in the chat there for you. So if you choose to go to the city's website, you will encounter and follow this link that we're providing. You will get the request to speak to council form. Next, please, Ian. So on that request to speak to council form, there'll be a series of pull down lists, as you saw on the last one. For this particular topic and conversation, we're going to be talking to the General Issues Committee. The General Issues Committee is the one that handles the budget. So you will select on the pull down the General Issues Committee. You will then have a section where you'll be required to fill out your name, reason for delegation. You don't have to fill out organization. You need to fill in your email address. You can just put your postal code if you don't want to put your full address on the public record. And then you want to specify your reason for delegating. And for everyone who's thinking about delegating on budget day, that reason is going to be to speak to on February 8th at the GIC to the 2021 budget. So you don't have to provide too many details in there. You don't have to outline your thesis. You just a quick line of why you're talking so the clerk knows which agenda to put you on. There are other two options that you'll see at the very bottom of that form. One of them is, will you be making a presentation? If you choose to create a video or a PowerPoint presentation, you have to have that to the clerk ahead of time. So you have to select that button. And that little tab and say yes. And if you're asking for funds from the city, so this would be if you were a sporting group or a not-for-profit or a housing provider and you were coming up with a very specific request to say, I need $5,000 for hockey equipment, or I need something else, you would definitely check that box there. Next slide, please. So you'll get that, as I mentioned here, you'll need to require your reasons. Here are those check boxes I was discussing to fill in. And then at the very bottom, right here, there's a button you press to submit. Once you submit it, next slide, Ian. What you're going to do is, okay, we'll go through the delegation to email first. Sorry, I forgot. So the other way to do this is to give a delegation via email. So you open up your email browser and you're going to send an email to clerk@cityofhamilton.ca. You're going to include your name, your address, telephone number, and the reason for your delegation. In this case, it's going to be the 2021 budget meeting on February 8th. So we're going to put the subject matter delegation to the General Issues Committee, February 8th, and then you're just going to put something that includes your name, address. I like to be a little polite and say, hello, clerk, my name is Carl. You've got to give your name. I wish to delegate to the February 28th, 2021 GIC meeting. If you have any questions, I can be reached at this phone number and this address. And I will be talking about my experience with the Just Recovery Hamilton Coalition, but you don't have to be that specific. You just say, I want to talk about the budget. And then make sure that you include your name so that they can get it on your agenda, and make sure that you include a telephone number if the clerk has to call you for any issues. And then, as I said, you can just throw your postal code in there if you want it. Next slide, please. Not give your full address. So what's going to happen, whether you put, you're going to get the form and an email confirmation from the budget delegation. This is what they're going to look like. And the form is going to be exactly what you filled in on the website. And then shortly after this form is processed, you're going to get an email from the legislative secretary over at the clerk's office, saying that they're forwarding your request off to the council coordinator. So it's a procedural thing. This happens every single time. So you'll get one email, and then next slide, Ian. You will get another email with instructions from the clerk that will mention that you are going to be put on the agenda to be voted on by council. So what happens is all of the delegation requests are put on as requests. And then the first thing the council does is vote to approve all of the requests of everybody to speak before council. It's a procedural thing. It will also outline letting you know that how you're going to be participating, that you're going to get a WebEx. It's similar to Zoom, but it's what the city uses, a link that you'll be required to log into. That Linda can go into more into that in depth. And then this is your confirmation that yes, indeed, you're signed up, everything's ready to go, and you will get that link when the clerk is ready. Next slide. So that's it, and off to Linda.
Thanks so much, Carl. So just going to give you a little bit more detail about what to expect. You know, Carl has walked you through submitting your request to speak. And I just would add as well, so we've talked about how you can pre-record a message, you can do a live presentation on Public Delegation Day. You can also provide written submissions, and you would use the same method that Carl described. And that's an important one too, just in case you're not ready to take that leap and make a recorded or a live delegation. So again, your request is going to be added to that agenda, and council will approve. And you can watch the meeting. So if you have made the request to formally delegate at the meeting itself, you'll get that link that Carl described. It'll come to you in an email. And the city of Hamilton uses WebEx. So you'll have instructions there on how to get into the system. And then once you're in, you're actually within the city's WebEx system. You'll be able to watch the meeting from there. And they'll queue you up, and you'll be able to hear when it's your turn to speak. And you'll be invited to unmute and to actually deliver your delegation. So again, you'll have up to 5 minutes to present. And one thing that I think we all really want to help you to do is to feel comfortable about committing to make a live delegation. And one thing that all of us who are talking to you today have gone through the experience. And I'm going to be really honest with you in saying the first time I did this live in the council chambers, I was really nervous, really nervous. So I could feel butterflies in my stomach and got up and did it. And I've gone and done this so many times again since that first time. And believe me, it's something that you can make yourself comfortable doing. And I think if anything, if I was to say anything to you now with the pandemic, is a great time to give this a try, because it's your chance to delegate, and you could be sitting in the comfort of your own home while you do it. So it's, in a weird way, it's kind of a good thing. I now delegate sitting in my living room in a comfy chair with a nice hot cup of tea beside me. So think about all of that if you're a little bit apprehensive, but know that it's a universal feeling. But you really should just focus on that wonderful opportunity that you have as a member of this community to share with City Council, our decision makers, because we're really their bosses at the end of the day, and they need to hear from us. So be prepared. You're going to have your 5 minutes to delegate. Sometimes councillors do ask questions of delegates. And so you need to be prepared for that. I think if there's one thing that I've learned is that you have the power to tell a questioner, because I've had this experience where a councillor asks something that's just off on some crazy tangent. So I've learned to be comfortable saying, through the chair, with all due respect, councillor, I don't think that's really relevant to what I'm talking to you about here today. So you say that in your own words, but feel empowered to do that if you need to. And then you should also feel comfortable simply saying you don't know the answer to a question, because this opportunity for you is really all about you sharing your concerns about your experiences living in the city and things that are impacting you and things that you want to see changed for the better. So really, I guess I can't say this enough. We're urging all of you to feel comfortable taking this step and taking this opportunity to share your views and your concerns with council at the session on February 8th. And Ian, if you could take it to the next slide, please. So I just want to recap some key dates and access information. So again, the delegation day itself is Monday, February the 8th. It starts at 3 p.m. And then again, here are some deadlines you need to be aware of. Again, for those written delegations, those would need to be submitted to the clerk by noon on Friday, February the 5th. If you are doing either a pre-recorded delegation or you want to do that live virtual delegation, you have to have that request submitted to the clerk by noon on Thursday, February the 4th. So with the virtual rules, they do require more lead time to be notified about those two options. And again, to view the General Issues Committee meeting for public delegation, you just need to go to the city's website. So that's www. Actually, I think, is that the right email? We should double check that that's the right web address. I think it's on.ca, .hamilton, or it's hamilton.ca. We'll make sure we get that right for you. And once you're on the city's website, you click on the live stream icon. So I apologize. I think I made that error on the address. There's a live stream icon at the top of the page, just to the left of the search box. You can also watch the meeting live from the city's YouTube channel. And then again, if you are doing a live delegation, you'll already be in the WebEx system and able to watch from there until you do your delegation, but be prepared because the general protocol is that once you've delegated, the city expects that you'll log out of their system. So be ready to have to jump into the city live stream or the YouTube channel. One other thing that we wanted to let you know about is that we are going to set up just a kind of a Zoom room where you can check in. And we're doing that because normally when it's a live delegation experience, you know, there are a whole bunch of us sitting in the council chambers, and we try to support each other. You know, say to people, great job after they've done, and you know, give people the support that they need as they're going through the process. So the idea is that there'll be a virtual room that you can check into as well, where you can chat with others about how things are going. And I believe we'll even be streaming the meeting from within that room. So we'll provide those details in a follow-up email for people who've participated in one of the workshops that we're doing. Thanks, and I'll pass it on. I'm not sure who's next. Oh, sorry, that's still me. So just a little bit more about Saturday morning, about Just Recovery Hamilton. If you don't know about Just Recovery Hamilton, you've learned that you've gotten a great overview from Carl this morning, but if you want to dig into it in more detail, you can access the full report with all of the recommendations at justrecoveryhamilton.ca. There is a general email address that you can reach out using. One more thing worth mentioning too is that if you're linked with an organization that you think would be interested in joining the coalition of organizations that have already come together, we're definitely looking to expand the network of groups to strengthen our voice and our message. You can find a form on the Just Recovery Hamilton website that you can fill out and submit to let us know that you're interested and your organization is interested in becoming involved. Thanks.
I think it's back to Veronica.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. I thought it was Ian after. So this is the closing. So if people, so now we're going to, thank you. This is the workshop. If you would like to join us today, as we mentioned at the start of the workshop, we will be having small breakout groups for people that are interested to start putting their delegation together, chance to discuss the presentation and troubleshoot any concerns. This small training session will run for about 15 minutes and everybody is welcome to stay. If you are leaving us, thank you for coming, and